I'm Emily Carter, 31 years old, and the night everything began, the rain was coming down hard enough to shake the windows. 3 sharp knocks hit my front door, each one louder than the last. When I opened it, my father stood there in a soaked coat, my mother clutching a box marked master bedroom, and my brother behind them wearing that same smug half-smile I remembered from years ago. My father's words cut through the sound of the storm. "You're alone, Emily. No husband, no children. We're taking this house." I didn't raise my voice or argue. I just looked at them calm and steady and reached for my phone because this time I wasn't the one standing outside in the rain. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to build a life from nothing after the people you trusted turned their backs. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio, where lawns were trimmed every Saturday, porch lights clicked on at dusk, and everyone waved without really knowing each other. My father, Robert, managed a local bank branch and treated every moment of our lives like a ledger that needed to balance. My mother, Margaret, kept the house spotless, the bills paid, and the neighbors impressed. She had a gift for making our family look picture-perfect, matching sweaters for Christmas fresh lilies on the counter, polite smiles at every church potluck. My brother Ethan, 3 years older, was their pride. He had charm ambition and a knack for saying exactly what they wanted to hear. I was different, quiet patient, drawn to the glow of my old laptop more than to parties or crowds. While Ethan spent summers on family trips to Myrtle Beach, I worked the evening shift at the local grocery store, saving every dollar in a coffee tin I kept under my bed. On Sundays, we'd sit around the table for roast chicken and my father's sermons about success. I still remember the night I gathered the courage to tell them I wanted to study web design. Robert set down his fork like I'd said something obscene. "That's not a career, Emily," he said. "That's a hobby people give up by 30. My mother laughed softly, tilting her wine glass. "Sweetheart, people who do that kind of work end up broke or freelancing forever. Study accounting something real." Ethan smirked across the table. "Maybe she can make a website for the grocery store." Their laughter filled the room, warm, casual, and cruel. I laughed too, but my hands trembled under the tablecloth. That night I closed my sketchbook and told myself I'd prove them wrong even if no one would ever say they were proud. When Ethan turned 18, my parents surprised him with a shiny new sedan, complete with a bow on the hood and a banner in the driveway. A few months later, on my own 18th birthday, my father handed me a card with $50 inside. "Get yourself something useful," he said. I used it to buy a used textbook for my computer class at the community college. Those first years were brutal. I waited tables during the day, took classes at night, and studied until my eyes blurred. Sometimes I'd fall asleep at my desk with the hum of my old computer as the only sound in the room. No one called to ask how I was doing. No one sent a note when I made the dean's list. But my grandmother Grace did. She lived 2 hours away in a little town just over the state line in the same cottage she and my late grandfather had built brick by brick after the war. Every Sunday, she called, always starting the same way, "You holding up, honey?" When I drove out to visit her during summer breaks, she'd hand me lemonade, point to the flower beds, and say, "Freedom isn't being alone, it's knowing you can take care of yourself." I didn't realize then how much those words would matter. By the time I finished my degree, I was 22 and exhausted, but proud. I took a photo outside the registrar's office, me holding my diploma in a cheap plastic sleeve, and mailed it to my parents with a small note that said, "I did it." Weeks passed with no reply. Instead, I saw another family photo online, Ethan standing between them at a country club dinner, my father's hand on his shoulder, my mother glowing. I closed my laptop and whispered to myself that I didn't need their approval anymore, even though part of me still wished for it. When I finally landed my first job at a tiny digital design agency downtown, the salary was barely enough to scrape by, but the feeling of walking into that office with my own keycard was everything. My desk was secondhand and wobbled a little, but I bought a small lamp for it anyway. Each night, I'd stay late teaching myself new software, chasing that quiet thrill of creating something from nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, success would bring them back around. But success wasn't what they wanted from me. They wanted proof that their version of the world was right, that I'd eventually crawl home and admit defeat. Every holiday letter from them was a list of Ethan's achievements, his promotions, his new car, his business trips, followed by a single polite line. "Hope you're doing well, Emily." I told myself I didn't mind, but deep down, every ignored message, every forgotten birthday chipped away at something I didn't know how to rebuild. I didn't realize then that love from them would always come with conditions, that it would take losing everything to finally understand how strong I really was. And when that moment came on a cold night 5 years later, I'd stand in the same rain they once left me under and make a choice that would change all of our lives forever. For a long time, I believed that if I worked hard enough, my parents would finally see me as their equal. I thought small victories might bridge the quiet distance that always hung between us. After college, I sent postcards when I moved into my first apartment, called on birthdays, and even mailed little gifts when I could afford them. Each time I hoped for something more than silence in return. When my father did answer the phone, his tone was polite but distant, the kind you use with a stranger who happens to share your last name. The more Ethan succeeded, the more invisible I became. Every family update revolved around him. My parents would send photos from his award dinners or beach vacations, my mother's handwriting looping proudly across the card. "Your brother just got another promotion. Hope you're doing well." I would stare at those glossy pictures from my tiny apartment and tell myself I didn't mind. Deep down, though, it chipped away at something I couldn't name. I tried to make myself useful, thinking that might earn a place in their world again. When tax season came around, I volunteered to help my father organize their returns. When their Wi-Fi went out, I drove 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon just to fix it. My mother barely looked up from her tablet when I arrived. "Ethan could have done it faster," she said, and went back to scrolling. I smiled like it didn't hurt. Holidays were worse. Every Christmas, Ethan's achievements filled the conversation like air, leaving no room for anything else. The year I got promoted to senior designer, I tried to tell them over dinner. My father nodded absently and poured himself another drink. "That's nice," he said. "Ethan just got accepted into an MBA program." My mother beamed with pride, her hand resting on my brother's arm as if he'd just discovered fire. My news vanished somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the next toast. After dinner, I helped my mother clean the dishes while Ethan and my father relaxed in the living room. The sound of their laughter floated down the hallway as I scrubbed plates in silence. On the counter sat framed photos of Ethan shaking hands with college deans and company executives, all perfectly positioned. My old school picture was tucked behind one of them, only the edge of my smile still visible. For years, I tried to ignore the pattern. I worked longer hours, built a reputation at the agency, and saved every spare dollar I could. I believed stability would eventually mean security. But one gray morning, all of that collapsed. I arrived at the office to find the doors locked and a paper taped to the glass closed until further notice. Inside, the lights were off. No one answered the phone. By the end of the week, I learned the company had declared bankruptcy. My final paycheck bounced. I spent days polishing my portfolio and applying for every job I could find. Weeks turned into a month and my savings began to shrink. When my roommate moved out, I covered rent alone until I couldn't anymore. The apartment that had once been a symbol of independence became a quiet shell filled with boxes and unpaid bills. One evening, I sat on the floor beside my laptop, scrolling through rejection emails. The rain outside tapped against the window like it wanted in. I counted the money left in my account, barely enough for another week. My hand hovered over my phone for a long time before I finally made the call I never wanted to make. My father answered on the third ring. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I lost my job. I just need some help covering rent this month. I'll pay it back." There was a pause, then a sigh heavy enough to make my chest tighten. "Emily," he said, "actions have consequences. You chose a career with no security." I swallowed hard. "It's only $2,000, just a loan." My mother's voice came faintly through the line. "We can't, Emily. We're paying for Ethan's MBA. You need to learn responsibility." The call ended with a click, leaving me staring at my reflection in the dark phone screen. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. That night I drove to their house thinking maybe it would be different face to face. The porch light was on the same warm glow I remembered from childhood. My father opened the door, only halfway blocking the entrance with his shoulder. "Dad, please," I whispered, rain dripping from my coat. "Just until next month." He shook his head. "You made your choices. Live with them." My mother appeared behind him, arms crossed. "This isn't a good time." Then the door closed. The rain soaked through everything, my coat, my shoes, even the envelope of resumes I carried in my bag. For a long minute I stood there staring at the closed door, the porch light blurring through the water in my eyes. When I finally turned back to my car, the cold followed me like a shadow. I parked behind a Walmart that night. The heater barely worked and the windows fogged from my breath. I wrapped myself in a blanket from the back seat and tried to ignore the hum of delivery trucks outside. Each morning I used a gym day pass to shower and bought the cheapest coffee I could find to stay warm. My world had shrunk to a car, a phone charger, and a stack of job applications. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that something would come through soon. But the silence grew heavier. Each rejection email felt sharper than the last. I stopped checking my messages altogether. One afternoon, I sat in a corner of a coffee shop staring at my laptop when someone spoke my name. "Emily." I looked up to see Lily Dawson, an old friend from high school, standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a look of surprise that softened into concern. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck. Instead, tears slipped down before I could stop them. Lily set down the cups and reached for my hand. "Come on," she said gently. "You're coming with me." Her spare bedroom felt like heaven. Clean sheets, warm air, the smell of brewed coffee drifting through the hallway. The next morning she made calls on my behalf and arranged an interview at her boyfriend's small design studio. His name was David Hurst, a quiet man with kind eyes who flipped through my portfolio carefully before nodding. "You've got real talent," he said. "Start Monday." For the first time in months, I exhaled without guilt. The work was steady, the pay modest, but fair. I stayed late, said yes to every project, and slowly began to feel like myself again. But just as things started to steady, another call came, one that would change everything once more. A woman's voice came through the line. "Is this Emily Carter?" "This is Margaret Hayes, Grace's neighbor. She's in the hospital." "It's serious." The world seemed to tilt. I barely remember the drive, only the cold steering wheel beneath my hands and the faint hum of tires against the highway. When I walked into the hospital room, my grandmother looked small under the white sheets, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You came?" she whispered, her hand trembling in mine. I tried to call. I squeezed her fingers gently. "I know, Grandma." She smiled faintly. "You always try." 3 days later, she handed me a thick envelope from her bedside drawer. "Inside are the cottage papers and the keys," she said softly. "It's yours now. Take care of it." I shook my head, tears spilling over. "Please don't talk like that." She smiled again, tired but peaceful. "I built that house to protect what matters. Now it's your turn." That night she slipped away while I held her hand. The funeral was quiet, just a handful of neighbors and the minister's low voice beneath the sound of wind through the trees. My parents arrived late, faces tight with something between anger and disbelief. At the reading of the will, the lawyer unfolded a single page and read clearly, "To my granddaughter, Emily Carter, I leave my cottage and remaining savings." The silence that followed was heavy. My father's jaw clenched. "This is unacceptable," he said. The lawyer didn't flinch. "Mrs. Mitchell's wishes are final." My mother turned to me, her voice sharp. "You manipulated her. My own mother." I met her eyes steadily. "You never visited her." "I did," Ethan muttered under his breath. "You don't deserve it." I stood sliding the keys into my pocket. Grandma thought I did. Then I walked out. The sun was setting when I reached the cottage, paint-peeling weeds curling along the fence. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I set my bag down and whispered into the quiet, "I finally have a home." What I didn't know then was that this little house would become both my refuge and the next battleground that peace once found wouldn't stay unchallenged for long. The first night I spent at my grandmother's cottage, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The walls carried her scent, lavender and cedar mixed with thyme, and though everything creaked, it felt solid safe. I opened the envelope she'd given me one more time. The deed, the savings account statement, and a note written in her neat cursive, "You'll know what to do with this place when the time comes." I read it twice before setting it on the nightstand beside her old lamp. The days that followed were quiet but filled with work. The roof leaked in 2 places, and the plumbing moaned every time I turned on a faucet. I spent the first few weeks patching, scrubbing, and painting until my hands blistered. Every stroke of the brush felt like a conversation I wished I'd had sooner. I filled the kitchen with plants, hung fresh curtains, and repainted the walls the soft cream color my grandmother had always loved. For the first time in years, mornings felt calm. I woke to birdsong instead of traffic-brewed coffee by the window and started sketching again. David let me continue working remotely after the funeral. He said my dedication spoke louder than any resume, and I wanted to live up to that faith. By night, I took on freelance jobs, small-town bakeries, local bookstores, and repair shops that couldn't afford big agencies. My laptop sat on a worn oak table under the window, the same spot where my grandmother used to sort seed packets every spring. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A year slipped by almost unnoticed. My hands grew steadier, my savings thicker. I filed the paperwork for my own design business and named it Horizon Creative, after something my grandmother once said, "Keep your eyes on the horizon, not the storm." Clients came mostly through word of mouth. The bakery down the street told the flower shop, who told the hardware store, and soon my calendar was full. When the work grew too heavy for one person, I hired my first part-time assistant, a young woman named Renee Walsh, who had just finished design school. She reminded me of myself at that age, curious, hardworking, and grateful for any chance to learn. Together we built websites, designed logos, and spent long afternoons sorting through color swatches. Each finished project added to the quiet proof that I could build something lasting. Evenings were slower. I'd take a walk through the garden, pruning the roses my grandmother had planted decades ago. Sometimes I'd sit under the oak tree out back with a cup of tea, the fading light filtering through its branches. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was full, like the house had exhaled after years of waiting. That peace deepened when I met Ryan. He came by one Wednesday morning to ask about a website for his bookstore downtown. He was polite, calm, with an easy smile that felt like sunlight through clouds. "I need a rebrand," he said, glancing around my studio. "Something that feels like a new chapter." I told him to give me a week. He left his card on the table, the kind printed on thick paper that smelled faintly of ink and cedar. When I delivered the first draft of his design, he invited me to lunch to discuss details. Lunch became another meeting, and soon those meetings had nothing to do with business at all. He had a quiet way of listening that made even silence feel meaningful. Over time, he became a fixture in my days, dropping by with coffee, fixing the loose hinge on the back door, or helping plant herbs in the garden. I didn't plan for love, but it found me anyway, gentle and steady. By 32, Horizon Creative had grown into something solid. I converted my grandmother's old garage into a proper office, complete with 2 workstations and shelves lined with client binders. Renee became full-time, and we took on another designer, Calvin Brooks, who specialized in photography. The 3 of us formed a rhythm that worked. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about my parents. I wondered if they'd ever driven past the cottage, or even remembered its address. The last time we'd spoken had been at the will reading, and I hadn't heard from them since. The absence stung less with time, but it never fully disappeared. Still, I chose peace over bitterness. Then one Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe the screen. "Hey, Emily," the voice said brightly. "It's Ethan." The air seemed to thicken. "It's been a while," he continued. "Heard your business is doing great. Thought maybe we could reconnect." I hesitated, the word reconnect hanging heavy between us. "Sure," I said quietly. "When?" "We agreed on Saturday." The whole drive there, my stomach twisted. When their car finally pulled into the driveway, it felt like time had folded back on itself. My father stepped out first, smiling too wide. My mother followed, balancing a box of pastries as if she were arriving for brunch, not reconciliation. Ethan trailed behind, wearing sunglasses, though the sky was overcast. They toured the house slowly, their eyes sweeping over every surface like inspectors at an open house. "You've done well," my mother said, her voice sugar-coated, "for someone with no husband or children." My father nodded, scanning the living room. "This place is too big for one person, don't you think? Must be a lot to maintain." I kept my voice level. "I manage fine." Lunch was quiet. Forks clinked against plates, and conversation drifted toward Ethan's business ventures and my father's plans for retirement. Then out of nowhere, my father cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said. "Your mother and I could move in. There's plenty of room here." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. "Move in?" He nodded, matter of fact. "It's wasted space otherwise. We could take the master bedroom. Ethan could use that office of yours. It's perfect for running his new business." My mother smiled faintly. "It would bring the family closer." The silence that followed was long and sharp. I set my fork down carefully. "You can't be serious," I said. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking. "We're family, Emily. You owe us some space." The word "owe" cracked something open inside me. I looked at them one by one, the same faces that had turned me away in the rain 5 years earlier, and felt the tremor fade from my voice. "Like I owed you when I begged for help and you shut the door in my face." My father stiffened. "That was different." "No," I said evenly. "It wasn't." My mother's tone softened as if she could still control the moment. "You're being emotional, sweetheart. We just want to help." I stood slowly, my pulse steady for the first time in years. "Get out!" My mother blinked, confused. "Excuse me? Get out." The words hung there, calm and final. They left a few minutes later, their backs rigid, their goodbyes stiff and polite. But as their car disappeared down the gravel road, I caught the look in my father's eyes, something cold, something unfinished. I knew this wasn't over. That night, I sat under the oak tree where my grandmother once read her gardening journals. The wind moved through the branches softly, almost like a warning. I thought about how peace could be fragile, how even after everything they still saw me as property rather than person. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, and I promised myself that whatever came next, I wouldn't lose what I had built. For a few weeks after my family's visit, the house felt heavier. Their words lingered in the air long after their footsteps faded down the driveway. I tried to keep working, to stay focused on projects and deadlines, but my mind kept circling back to that conversation at the table, the calm certainty in my father's voice when he said the house was too big for one person. I told myself it was over, that they had gotten the message, yet part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Ryan noticed before I said a word. One evening as we sat outside under the oak tree, he watched me trace circles on the table with my fingertip. "You've been quiet lately," he said softly. The sunset stretched across the sky in shades of gold and rust. "They came here," I said finally. "My parents and Ethan, they want to move in." His brow tightened. "Move in." After everything they did, I nodded. "They think I owe them." I told them to leave. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "You did the right thing," he said. "This house is yours, Emily. You built this life. Don't let them take that from you." I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. The next morning I went back to work, determined to shake the unease. Renee and Calvin were busy at their desks, their laughter breaking the stillness. The hum of computers and the soft click of keyboards filled the studio. It should have felt normal, but something about the air felt off, like the moment before a storm. That evening, Ryan and I packed for a weekend trip to Chicago. Horizon Creative had been invited to a design conference, and one of my small business clients had offered to sponsor our stay. I hesitated before locking the front door, checking twice that the security system light was blinking red. "You're still thinking about them," Ryan said gently. "Just a habit," I replied. The drive took 4 hours, broken up by small towns and long stretches of highway where the world felt wide open. By the time we reached the city, my shoulders finally began to relax. The hotel room overlooked the lake, and for 2 days we listened to speakers, met potential clients, and walked through bright lobbies filled with design booths and business cards. For the first time in months, I felt the same excitement I used to have in my early days of building Horizon. It was the second morning when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Emily, there are people at your house." My chest tightened. It was from Mrs. Palmer, my grandmother's old neighbor. I saw them carrying boxes inside. I opened the Ring app with shaking hands. The video feed loaded slowly, then cleared. My father stood at the back door with a crowbar forcing the lock. My mother waited behind him holding a stack of linens. Ethan carried 2 suitcases through the doorway. They moved like they had done this before, methodical, certain. Ryan looked over my shoulder. "Call the police," he said. "Now." But first, I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice casual. "Hey, sis." "What are you doing in my house?" I asked. "We're moving in," he said simply. "This is a family home. You don't need it all to yourself." My voice steadied. "You broke in." "We have every right," he snapped. "You're alone, Emily. No husband, no kids. You don't even use half the rooms. Try to stop us and we'll contest Grandma's will." I felt Ryan's hand on my shoulder grounding me. "Try me," I said quietly and hung up. We drove straight back. The rain started an hour outside Columbus, turning the highway into streaks of silver under the headlights. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened the windshield wipers, beating a steady rhythm. Ryan didn't speak much. He didn't need to. When we pulled into the driveway, my car lights swept across a sight that made my stomach twist. Their vehicles were parked neatly beside mine, the porch light glowing like it used to when I was a child coming home from school. Inside, the curtains were drawn. Shadows moved across the living room window. I unlocked the door slowly. My father was in the hallway, hammer in hand, adjusting a frame. My mother stood nearby, unpacking dishes into the kitchen cabinet. Ethan was upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the old wooden floor. My photos had been replaced with theirs. My clothes were stuffed into cardboard boxes stacked by the door. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," my father said calmly, setting the hammer down. "It's done." I looked around the room, my pulse steady, my voice lower than I expected. "Is it?" He crossed his arms. "We're taking this house, Emily. You can't stop us." I smiled once, a small, quiet thing, and reached for my phone. "One call," I said. "That's all it takes." Ryan stepped back, giving me space as I dialed. The 911 operator answered, her tone clear and measured. "My family broke into my home," I said. "I have video proof." She told me to stay on the line. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway. The red and blue lights flashed against the wet pavement, reflecting in the living room window. My father straightened his jacket as the officers stepped inside. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We're her family." I held up my phone. "Family doesn't use a crowbar." I played the video from the security camera, the sound of metal scraping against the lock, the door giving way, my mother stepping inside behind him. The officers exchanged a glance. One turned to my parents. "You have 30 minutes to gather your belongings and leave. If you're still here after that, you'll be arrested for breaking and entering." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We have nowhere to go." I kept my tone even. "That's not my problem." Ethan muttered something under his breath, but the officers ignored him. They moved quickly after that, boxes shoved into trunks, voices raised in frustration. My father's jaw tightened as he carried out the last load. "We built this family," he said bitterly. "You're the one tearing it apart." I stood by the doorway, watching the rain drip from the roof, listening to their footsteps fade into the night. When the last car door slammed, the house went still. One of the officers handed me a card with a case number. "You did the right thing, ma'am," he said. "It's over now." After they left, I walked through each room, slowly turning off lights, running my hand over the walls my grandmother had once painted. The air smelled faintly of rain and old dust. It wasn't perfect anymore. The floors scuffed, the frames crooked, but it was mine again. Later, Ryan found me sitting under the oak tree, still in my damp coat. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though the tears finally came. He sat beside me without a word, and for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. In the weeks that followed, the police finalized the charges breaking and entering trespassing property damage. My father and Ethan pleaded guilty and were sentenced to probation. The restraining order kept them 500 feet away from the property. The justice system didn't roar, it whispered. But in that quiet, I finally felt something like peace. The house returned to its rhythm. The garden began to bloom again, wild and bright. I added new locks to the doors, installed stronger windows, and let the sound of the wind through the oak leaves remind me I was safe. Yet one evening as the sun set behind the hills, my phone rang again, an unknown number glowing on the screen. When I answered, a familiar voice trembled on the other end. "Emily," my mother said softly, "I heard you got married, and that you're expecting. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." The words hung there, fragile and unexpected. I didn't know what to say, so I simply whispered, "Thank you." When the call ended, I sat by the window watching the rain begin to fall again, soft this time, steady like a promise that everything I'd built would keep growing. The months after my parents were removed from the property felt like a long exhale after years of holding my breath. The silence that once haunted the cottage now carried peace. The rain no longer sounded like memory, it sounded like life moving forward. Ryan and I spent our evenings fixing what they'd damaged. We sanded floors, replaced locks, and painted the rooms together. He'd turn on the old radio my grandmother loved, and we'd work until the music faded into laughter. The garden came back first. Roses my grandmother had planted decades ago bloomed again in the spring, climbing the fence line like they'd been waiting for sunlight. I built a small swing under the oak tree and hung a lantern nearby that glowed softly each night. For the first time, the cottage didn't just feel like home, it felt like the center of a life I'd earned. Ryan proposed on a quiet Sunday morning, kneeling in the backyard while I watered the plants. There was no big speech, no audience, just him, holding out a simple gold ring and saying, "This feels right, doesn't it?" I said yes before I even realized I was crying. We married that fall surrounded by a handful of close friends. The ceremony was small, held under the same oak tree that had witnessed so many beginnings and endings. Not long after I learned I was pregnant. The news felt like light, unexpected and warm. I told Ryan one evening while he was locking up the bookstore. He stood still for a moment, as if the world had paused, then wrapped me in his arms. "You've already built a home," he whispered. "Now it's time to fill it." Those next few months were steady and kind. Work at Horizon Creative flourished. Renee and Calvin took on more responsibilities, freeing me to focus on clients and rest. Ryan handled the business side of his store, while I prepared the nursery in the spare room, the one that used to be my grandmother's sewing space. I painted the walls soft sage, hung shelves shaped like clouds, and placed a rocking chair near the window. It overlooked the oak tree, now heavy with leaves. When I felt the first kick, I thought of my grandmother. I wondered what she would have said, probably something simple like, "You're doing just fine, honey." And for once, I believed it. Then one afternoon in early summer, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. "How's Blake?" a woman asked. "This is Officer Daniels from Franklin County Court. I'm calling to inform you that your father and brother have filed a civil claim regarding property ownership." My heart skipped. "Excuse me. They're contesting your grandmother's will," she continued. "They're claiming you influenced her decisions in her final months. You'll receive notice of the hearing soon." I set the phone down slowly. The air around me felt still, too still. Ryan found me standing by the window, the sun catching the edge of my wedding ring. "What happened?" he asked. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "They're trying again." Over the next few weeks, papers arrived, legal letters, copies of false statements and claims filled with half-truths. According to them, my grandmother had been coerced and emotionally manipulated in her last year of life. They wanted the cottage, the savings, everything. My hands shook as I read each line. I could hear my father's voice behind every word, calculated, measured, believing he could still control the outcome. Ryan contacted an attorney named Laura Jensen, a woman he knew from the bookstore who specialized in estate disputes. She met us at the cottage one evening, her expression calm and confident. "I've handled cases like this before," she said, spreading the documents across the dining table. "They don't have a chance, but they'll try to wear you down. That's what people like this do." Her words settled over me like armor. "Then we won't let them." I said quietly. The hearing date came faster than expected. The courthouse smelled of paper and old varnish, the kind of place where every sound seemed to echo. My parents sat across the aisle, dressed neatly as always. Ethan wore a navy suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, his confidence brittle around the edges. My father met my gaze once, expression unreadable. My mother stared straight ahead. The judge reviewed the documents, flipping through the will and the letters my grandmother had written. When it was my turn to speak, I told the truth plainly, that I had visited her every week, that she had taught me how to repair the fence, how to bake bread, how to plant bulbs before the frost. That she had called me the night before she passed and said, "I want you to have the house, Emily. You'll know how to keep it alive." My mother's lawyer objected once, citing emotional influence, but the judge silenced him with a glance. "Do you have any evidence," he asked, "of wrongdoing or undue pressure?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "We have suspicions," he said. The judge closed the folder. Suspicions are not proof. When the ruling came, it was clear and final. The property, savings, and assets remained under my name. The claim was dismissed. My father's jaw tightened. Ethan muttered something I couldn't hear. My mother gathered her purse, eyes glistening but unreadable. I thanked the judge quietly and left before they could speak to me. Outside, Ryan waited by the steps, his coat draped over one arm. When I told him it was over, he smiled faintly. "Grace would be proud," he said. I looked up at the gray sky. I think she already knows. In the weeks after the cottage settled into its rhythm again, I spent my mornings working from the studio and my afternoons preparing for the baby. Ryan built a small cradle by hand, smoothing the wood until it shone. He carved a tiny horizon line along the headboard, a tribute to the name that had carried me through so much. When our daughter was born that winter, the world outside was quiet and bright. We named her Clara Grace Blake, after the two women who had taught me the meaning of love that stays. Holding her for the first time felt like standing in sunlight after years of shadow. I never heard from my father or Ethan again after the ruling. Occasionally I'd see a letter arrive with their handwriting, but I stopped opening them. They no longer had power here. The restraining order stood, and the silence that followed became the peace I'd always wanted. One evening, months later, I sat in the rocking chair by the window with Clara asleep in my arms. The lantern outside flickered, casting soft light through the glass. The rain began again, gentle against the roof. Ryan appeared in the doorway, smiling. "She's out already?" he asked. I nodded. "Just like her dad," I teased. He walked over, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You did it, Emily. You built the life you deserved." As the rain continued to fall, I looked out toward the oak tree where everything had started. The swing moved slightly in the wind, and for a moment I thought I saw my grandmother's figure under the branches, still peaceful, proud. I blinked and she was gone, leaving only the sound of rain and the steady heartbeat of the home she'd entrusted to me. The following spring came quietly. The air carried the scent of lilacs, and the house hummed with a rhythm that finally felt like home. Clara had just turned 6 months old, her laugh filling every corner of the cottage. Mornings began early, with her tiny hands reaching for me before the sun fully rose. Ryan brewed coffee, humming softly, while I sat by the window and rocked Clara back to sleep. Sometimes, when the light touched her hair, I could almost see traces of my grandmother there, a calm, steady spirit I hoped she would grow to know in her own way. Work at Horizon Creative grew faster than I expected. Our small studio had built a loyal client base, and word spread through neighboring towns. Renee managed day-to-day operations, now guiding new interns through projects, while Calvin handled photography and fieldwork. I split my time between design meetings and motherhood, a balance that left me tired but content. Life had settled into something simple and good, the kind of peace I never thought I'd find. Then one morning Ryan handed me a stack of mail while Clara played on the rug. "This one's from the courthouse," he said quietly. My chest tightened. The envelope bore the county seal. Inside was a short notice confirmation that my father and Ethan had violated the restraining order by visiting the property line 3 times in the last month. A neighbor had filed a report. Ryan set the letter down carefully. "They're still watching Emily." I nodded, staring at the oak tree outside. "They won't stop until they lose something that matters to them," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I felt the old unease stirring again, the same cold that had followed me the night they shut the door on me years ago. That evening, after Clara fell asleep, I pulled out my grandmother's old journal from the drawer beneath the bed. Between her notes about gardening and recipes, I found an entry written the year before she passed. If you ever feel afraid, remember, peace doesn't mean silence. It means power you no longer have to prove. I ran my hand over the words. For the first time, I understood what she meant. A few weeks later, Horizon Creative received its biggest opportunity yet. A regional publishing company, Evergreen Media, reached out for a complete rebrand. The project would take months, but it could put us on the map. Renee's voice trembled with excitement when she told me. "This is it, Emily," she said. "We're finally competing with the larger firms." I spent late nights sketching drafts while Ryan read beside me, his hand occasionally brushing mine. The smell of coffee and the soft hum of the baby monitor filled the air. We were building something real, steady, sustainable hours. And then one Friday evening, a message arrived that brought it all back into focus. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the words were simple. "You think you won? This isn't over." The screen glowed faintly in the dark. My first instinct was to delete it, but I saved it instead and called Laura Jensen the next morning. She arrived that afternoon, calm as always, a folder tucked under her arm. "You did the right thing," she said after reading the text. "We'll have it traced, but for now add it to the restraining order file." Ryan leaned against the counter, his expression steady but tense. "Do you think it was them?" he asked. Laura didn't hesitate. "It fits their pattern. They'll push boundaries until there's nothing left for them to take." She handed me a small card. "Keep documenting everything. Don't engage. The law will do the rest." After she left, I walked outside, the air thick with the scent of rain. The oak tree swayed gently, its branches whispering above the garden. I thought of my father's face that day in the courtroom, the way his jaw clenched when the judge ruled in my favor. For him, control wasn't about love. It was about ownership. But standing there under that tree, I realized something had changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing what I had. I'd already learned how to rebuild from nothing. That night I wrote a letter not to send, but to end the silence. "You taught me to live without you," I wrote. "You took away my roof, my comfort, my safety, and still I found peace. I don't need revenge, and I don't need your approval. The family I built is enough." I folded it neatly and tucked it inside my grandmother's journal. Weeks turned into months, and summer settled over the cottage. Clara learned to crawl, her laughter echoing through the hallways. Horizon Creative completed the Evergreen Media project, earning recognition across the state. Invitations for conferences and interviews started arriving, but I turned down most of them. I didn't need applause, I needed quiet mornings and evenings that felt like home. Then, in late August, a certified letter arrived from the county. My father and Ethan had sold their home. According to the public filing, they were moving out of state. Ryan read it twice before setting it down. "Looks like they're finally gone," he said. I nodded slowly. They chased control their whole lives. Now they have nothing left to control. Still, closure didn't come in the form of their absence. It came one morning when I walked into the garden and saw the first rosebud of the season. It had grown on a branch we thought was dead after the storm. I knelt beside it, touching the soft edge of the petal. It wasn't perfect, but it had survived. So had I. Later that year, Horizon Creative expanded into a small downtown office. Renee and Calvin took the lead there while I kept the cottage as my quiet workspace. We hired 2 new designers and began mentoring students from the local college. Ryan's bookstore doubled in size, and he started hosting author nights that drew people from nearby towns. The life we had built was full but still simple, exactly what we wanted. On the anniversary of my grandmother's passing, we held a small gathering under the oak tree. Mrs. Palmer came with a basket of flowers, Renee brought her camera, and Lily drove in from the city. We planted a new tree beside the old one, a maple this time, and placed a stone at its base engraved with the words, "Keep your eyes on the horizon." As dusk settled, I stood there holding Clara, her head resting against my shoulder. Ryan slipped his arm around me. "She'd be proud of you," he said. I looked toward the house, its windows glowing softly in the fading light. "She gave me the strength to finish what she started," I replied. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain, again light and familiar. It reminded me that storms didn't always bring destruction. Sometimes they cleared the air for something better to grow. By the time Clara's first birthday arrived, the house had settled into a new kind of calm. The walls that once echoed with worry now held laughter's soft music and the steady rhythm of daily life. Ryan had hung tiny white lights along the fence, and friends from the studio gathered under the oak tree with paper cups of lemonade. Clara sat on my lap in a yellow dress, curious eyes following the balloons that floated above her. It was the first family celebration that felt like joy without condition. When everyone left that evening, I lingered outside. The garden glowed under the porch light, the flowers blooming wild and full. Ryan came out carrying a plate of leftover cake. "You okay?" he asked, setting it down beside me. I nodded. "I was just thinking," I said. "It took a long time to get here." He smiled. "And we're not done yet." He was right. Horizon Creative was thriving. We had just completed another major campaign for a hotel chain, and for the first time, we were being noticed outside the state. Renee handled most of the client work, and Calvin was training 2 new designers. It felt like everything we'd built every late night and every setback had finally come together. But success has a strange way of attracting the past. It started with an email to our company account. The subject line read, "Congratulations on your recent award from your proud family." The sender's name was familiar, Margaret Carter. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was short. "We saw your interview in the paper. We're happy for you and would love to reconnect. Maybe it's time we put everything behind us." Ryan found me reading it in the kitchen. "Is it her?" he asked. I nodded. "She wants to meet." He waited a beat before speaking. "You don't owe them anything." I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. "I know," I said softly, "but I also know how this works. They only reach out when they need something." 2 weeks later, I learned what that something was. Laura Jensen called me one morning, her voice steady but firm. "Emily," she said, "you should be aware that your parents have filed for bankruptcy. They're requesting an exemption to access family assets, including inherited property." I gripped the phone tighter. "The cottage?" "Yes," she said. "But don't worry, it's fully protected under your name. This is more about appearances. They're trying to save face." It didn't surprise me. For Robert and Margaret, pride had always mattered more than truth. Still, the thought of them using my grandmother's name again stirred something deep inside me. That night, after Clara fell asleep, I walked out to the porch and sat beneath the oak tree. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain from the nearby fields. Ryan joined me quietly, handing me a blanket. "They're not your problem anymore," he said. "You did your part." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what part of me he was comforting, the woman who had survived them or the daughter who still wished it hadn't ended this way. A month later, the story appeared in the local paper. Former bank manager and wife face financial investigation. It was brief but damning details about mismanaged investments, unpaid loans, and a suspended business license. Their names were out there for everyone to see. Ethan's, too. He had been listed as a co-signer. I stared at the printed page, remembering the arrogance in his voice the day he'd told me I didn't deserve my inheritance. That evening, I found an envelope on the porch. No return address. Inside was a note written in my father's handwriting. "We need to talk. Please. It's important." I sat at the table for a long time, tracing the letters with my thumb. Then I picked up the phone and called Laura. "Keep this for the record," I said. "I'm not responding." Weeks passed without another word. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving the studio, a familiar voice called from across the parking lot. "Emily." I turned and froze. My father stood near the sidewalk, thinner than I remembered his posture, smaller, almost uncertain. His suit hung loose on his frame, his hair grayer than before. "Please," he said, raising his hand slightly, "I just need a minute." I hesitated, but didn't walk closer. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. He nodded slowly. "I know. I just wanted to see you to say I'm sorry." The words fell heavy in the air. "For what you did or for losing everything?" I asked quietly. He lowered his eyes. "For both." Before I could answer, Ryan stepped out from behind me, his tone calm but clear. "This isn't the place." My father nodded again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm leaving town. I just wanted her to know." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the sound of traffic. That night, I sat at the edge of the bed, the baby monitor softly humming beside me. Ryan set a cup of tea on the nightstand and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Some endings don't need to be declared. They happen quietly, like doors closing in the distance. Months later, I learned through Laura that my parents had relocated to Arizona. Ethan had filed for personal bankruptcy shortly after. There were no more letters, no more claims, no more attempts to return. Just silence. Justice didn't come with fanfare. It arrived in the small ways, through the freedom to wake up without fear, to build without interference, to love without conditions. The same family who once threw me out into the rain now lived under the shadow of their own choices. And the house they tried to take became the place where my daughter took her first steps. On a warm evening that summer, Ryan and I sat outside as Clara toddled across the grass. The air smelled of cut flowers and rain. "You did it," Ryan said quietly. "You changed the story." I watched Clara reach for the swing under the oak tree, her laughter rising with the breeze. "No," I said softly. "We just stopped living theirs." The lantern above us flickered on, casting a glow across the garden. For the first time, I understood what peace really felt like, not loud or triumphant, but steady and earned. Every scar, every loss, every moment of doubt had led here to this house, this family, this life that finally belonged to me. But peace has its own rhythm, and just when I thought the past had settled for good, the phone rang again one evening, a number I hadn't seen in years. I hesitated before answering, my heart steady this time, not afraid. The phone rang again, that same unknown number glowing against the quiet of the living room. Ryan looked over from the couch, Clara asleep in his lap, her small hand curled around his thumb. I hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice came through, familiar, soft, uncertain. "Emily." It was my mother. There was a pause, just long enough to hear her steady her breath. "Your father's gone," she said. "It was sudden. A stroke. I thought you should know." The words didn't hit like a blow. They landed quietly, like the final note of a song I'd already heard too many times. I thanked her, my voice calm. She didn't ask for anything. No visit, no forgiveness, only said, "He kept your photo on his desk." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I heard the faint hum of wind through her phone. Then she said softly, "You built a good life, Emily. I hope you know I'm proud." After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain against the windows. It wasn't anger I felt anymore, just stillness, the kind that comes when a door finally closes for good. Ryan reached over and took my hand. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." In the days that followed, I found myself thinking less about my father's cruelty and more about the pieces of him that had shaped me. His discipline, his precision, even the stubbornness that once drove me to prove him wrong. Pain can leave behind strange gifts when you stop letting it define you. A few weeks later, I took Clara to the oak tree after dinner. The air was cool, the grass damp from the evening dew. I carried a small photo of my grandmother and pressed it into the soil beside the roots. Clara clapped her hands, laughing at the way the wind caught her hair. "That's where your great-grandma used to sit," I told her. "She taught me what home really means." Behind us, Ryan lit the porch lantern, its glow stretching across the yard. I looked around the cottage, the garden, the life we had built from every hard beginning, and realized how full the silence had become. The past no longer felt like a shadow. It was a story I'd outgrown, one that had taught me to value what couldn't be taken: self-respect, peace, and the quiet kind of love that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. I still keep the first letter my grandmother wrote me in a frame above my desk. Her handwriting tilts slightly to the right, strong and steady. "Keep your eyes on the horizon, not the storm." It carried me through more than she could have imagined. Now when clients visit my studio, they always ask about the oak tree outside the window. I tell them it's a family tradition, though the truth runs deeper. That tree saw everything the night I was cast out, the morning I reclaimed what was mine, and the day I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the courage to stay. As for my mother, we speak occasionally. The calls are brief but gentle. There are no accusations, no apologies. Just two women on opposite sides of a story finally laid to rest. Maybe forgiveness isn't about erasing the hurt. Maybe it's just about choosing peace over the weight of remembering. Clara turned 2 this spring. Her laughter fills the cottage the way my grandmother's voice once did. Sometimes when she runs barefoot through the garden, I catch myself smiling at how the past and present blur together, how one life quietly makes room for another. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that justice doesn't always arrive with punishment. Sometimes it comes as a mirror, showing who you've become in spite of everything. My family lost the power they once held over me, not through revenge, but through the simple fact that I no longer needed their approval to live a good life. The storms they brought into my world eventually passed, but what grew afterward was stronger, deeper rooted in love that couldn't be bought or threatened. And now on nights when the rain begins to fall and the wind brushes through the oak leaves, I sit by the window and watch it all, this life, this peace, this quiet victory. I whisper a thank you to the woman who taught me to keep building no matter how rough the storm. If you've ever had to start over from nothing, I hope you find your own horizon too. Leave a note in the comments if this story touched you, and remember you're stronger than the silence anyone left you in.